The rusted welcome sign for Millhaven barely clung to its post, the paint so faded that Kestrel had to squint through the cracked windshield of her pickup truck to make out the words. Population 847, it declared, though the census date had been obscured by decades of weather and neglect. She pulled over beside the skeletal remains of what had once been a gas station, its pumps standing like tombstones in the gathering dusk. "This can't be right," muttered Thaddeus from the passenger seat, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he consulted the yellowed map spread across his lap. The elderly historian had spent months researching this place, drawn by fragments of records that suggested Millhaven held secrets dating back to the 1950s. "The coordinates match perfectly, but according to my research, this town should still be inhabited." Behind them, the engine of Aramis's motorcycle growled to a stop. The weathered veteran swung his leg over the bike and removed his helmet, revealing graying temples and eyes that constantly scanned for threats. "Looks like a ghost town to me," he called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to dangerous situations. "We sure this is where your government contractor friend wanted to meet?" Zinnia emerged from the small sedan that had been struggling to keep pace with the other vehicles, her medical bag slung over one shoulder. Despite being the youngest of their group at 24, she moved with the confident efficiency of someone who had seen too much during her residency in urban emergency rooms. Dr. Chen's message was very specific about the location, she said, checking her phone and frowning at the lack of signal bars. She said she'd discovered something here that would change everything we know about viral transmission. Esperanza stepped out of the van that had carried their supplies, her teacher's instincts immediately cataloging the abandoned buildings that lined what had once been Main Street. Broken windows stared back at them like empty eye sockets, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "I don't like this," she said quietly, wrapping her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. "Something feels wrong here." The last member of their group, Caspian, was already setting up his equipment array, the young tech specialist's devices humming to life as he attempted to establish some form of communication with the outside world. His laptop screen cast an eerie blue glow in the growing darkness, and his fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced precision. "I'm getting some strange electromagnetic readings," he reported, his brow furrowed in concentration. "There's definitely some kind of interference coming from deeper in town." Thaddeus climbed out of the truck, his joints protesting after the long drive. At 73, he was easily the oldest member of their makeshift research team, but his mind remained sharp as the day he'd first started uncovering government secrets in dusty archives. Dr. Chen's research into viral weaponization programs led her here for a reason, he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades spent pursuing uncomfortable truths. "If she's right about what happened in Millhaven, then this place isn't just forgotten, it was deliberately erased from official records." Kestrel killed the engine and joined the others, her mechanic's eye automatically noting the decay patterns on the abandoned vehicles scattered throughout the town. Rust told stories, and these stories spoke of decades of neglect. "My grandfather used to talk about places like this," she said, running her calloused fingers through her short brown hair. "Mining towns that got shut down overnight, with everyone ordered to evacuate. He always said there were more of them than people realized." As if summoned by their conversation, a figure appeared in the doorway of what had once been the town's hotel. Dr. Chen stepped into the fading light, but something was immediately wrong with her appearance. Her usually immaculate lab coat was torn and stained, and her face bore the haggard expression of someone who hadn't slept in days. She raised one trembling hand in greeting, then collapsed to her knees on the cracked pavement. Zinnia was moving before the others could react, her medical training overriding any concerns about potential threats. She reached Dr. Chen's side just as the older woman tried to speak, her voice barely a whisper. "You have to leave," Dr. Chen gasped, her eyes wide with a terror that seemed to reach into her very soul. "It's not just viral transmission. It's mutation. They're not dead, they're evolving." Before anyone could respond, the sound of breaking glass echoed from somewhere deeper in the town. Then another. And another. The shadows between the buildings seemed to shift and move with purpose, and Esperanza felt her blood turn to ice as she realized that what she had mistaken for abandoned cars were actually vehicles whose occupants had never had the chance to escape. Caspian's equipment began shrieking warnings as his sensors detected movement throughout the town, dozens of heat signatures emerging from basements, buildings, and storm drains. "We've got company," he said, his voice tight with fear as he watched the readings multiply across his screen. "Lots of it." The forgotten city of Millhaven was about to remind them exactly why some places were meant to stay buried in the past. The first zombie emerged from the ruins of Brennan's hardware store like a twisted parody of a customer stepping out to greet them. What had once been a middle-aged man now moved with jerky, predatory grace, its flesh mottled with patches of gray-green discoloration that seemed to pulse with an internal rhythm. The creature's eyes had turned milky white, but somehow Kestrel could feel its attention locked onto their group with an intelligence that made her stomach clench with dread. "Everyone stay calm," Aramis commanded, his hand instinctively moving to the combat knife strapped to his thigh. Years of military training had taught him to assess threats quickly, and everything about this situation screamed danger. "Zinnia, how's Dr. Chen?" The young doctor was checking vitals with shaking hands, her medical training warring with the impossibility of what she was witnessing. Dr. Chen's pulse was erratic, her breathing shallow, and there were bite marks on her left arm that looked infected despite being relatively fresh. "She's in shock, possibly from blood loss," Zinnia reported, though her voice wavered as more shambling figures began to appear from the surrounding buildings. "These wounds, they look like human bite marks, but the tissue around them is showing signs of rapid necrosis." Thaddeus stepped protectively closer to the group, his historian's mind racing to connect the fragments of information he'd uncovered about Millhaven. The town had been the site of a classified government research facility in the 1950s, one that had supposedly been studying viral agents for biological warfare. According to the heavily redacted documents he'd managed to obtain, the project had been terminated abruptly in 1954, with all personnel relocated and the facility sealed. "The research Dr. Chen mentioned," he said urgently, "it wasn't just about viral transmission. They were experimenting with ways to weaponize diseases that could create controllable subjects. More zombies were emerging now, their movements becoming more coordinated as they seemed to respond to some unheard signal." Esperanza watched in horror as what had once been a woman in a floral dress lurched out of the post office, her face bearing the same gray-green discoloration and milky eyes. But this creature moved with purpose, its head tilting as if listening to something beyond human perception. "They're not mindless," Esperanza whispered, her teacher's instincts recognizing patterns in their behavior. "Look at how they're positioning themselves. They're trying to surround us." Caspian's equipment was going haywire, his screens flickering with data that defied explanation. "I'm reading some kind of low-frequency transmission," he reported, his fingers flying across multiple keyboards as he tried to isolate the source. "It's like they're networked somehow, sharing information through electromagnetic pulses." The zombie that had been the hardware store owner took another step forward, and its mouth opened to release a sound that was part groan, part whistle, a haunting note that seemed to resonate through the empty streets. Immediately, answering calls echoed from buildings throughout Millhaven, and Kestrel realized with growing terror that they were hearing the awakening of an entire town's worth of the undead. "We need to move now," she said, her mechanic's pragmatism cutting through the group's paralysis. "My truck's got the most power, but it won't carry all of us plus Dr. Chen." She was already calculating distances and obstacles, her mind shifting into the problem-solving mode that had served her well in countless automotive emergencies. Aramis was conducting his own tactical assessment, noting exit routes and potential defensive positions. The main road they'd used to enter town was already being blocked by shambling figures, but there appeared to be a side street that led toward what looked like an industrial complex on the outskirts. "The research facility Thaddeus mentioned," he said grimly. "If it's still standing, it might have better security measures than these civilian buildings." Dr. Chen stirred in Zinnia's arms, her eyes focusing with visible effort. "The facility," she gasped, her voice barely audible over the growing chorus of zombie calls. "That's where it started. The original strain, it was never meant to spread beyond the test subjects. But something went wrong. The containment protocols failed. A sound like breaking branches echoed through the evening air as more zombies began pouring out of buildings with increasing urgency. These weren't the shambling corpses of popular fiction, they moved with the coordination of a hunting pack, and their gray-green skin seemed to shift and adapt as Kestrel watched, growing darker in the shadows and lighter where streetlights still functioned. "They're evolving," Zinnia breathed, her medical training allowing her to recognize the biological impossibility of what she was observing. The cellular regeneration patterns, it's like they're adapting to their environment in real time. Esperanza grabbed Caspian's arm as his equipment began to emit a high-pitched whine. "Can you jam their communication somehow?" she asked desperately. "If they're coordinating through electromagnetic signals." "I'm trying," Caspian replied, sweat beading on his forehead as he adjusted frequencies and amplitudes. "But the signal is incredibly complex. It's not just communication, it's like they're sharing sensory data, creating a collective intelligence." The first zombie had closed half the distance to their position, and others were emerging from side streets and building entrances with increasing frequency. Aramis made the decision that would determine whether any of them survived the next hour. "Kestrel, get that truck started. Esperanza and Caspian, grab whatever supplies you can carry. Thaddeus, help Zinnia with Dr. Chen. We're heading for that industrial complex, and we're doing it now." As they scrambled to implement his orders, the forgotten city of Millhaven revealed the full extent of its horrific secret. From storm drains and basement windows, through broken doors and shattered storefronts, the undead residents began to emerge in numbers that defied belief. Whatever had happened here decades ago had created something far worse than simple reanimated corpses. It had created a collective organism that had been waiting patiently for fresh subjects to join its ranks. The rusted gates of the Millhaven Research Complex stood partially open, their chain-link barriers twisted inward as if something massive had tried to break out rather than in. Kestrel's truck skidded to a halt just inside the perimeter, its headlights illuminating warning signs in multiple languages that spoke of biohazards and restricted access. Behind them, the zombie horde had grown to what looked like hundreds of figures, all moving with that same unsettling coordination as they poured through the town streets. "Building 3, Dr. Chen managed to whisper as Zinnia helped her from the truck, pointing with a trembling finger toward a concrete structure that loomed against the night sky like a brutalist monument. "Emergency shelter protocols still might be active." Aramis was already moving, his military training evident in the way he swept the compound for threats while maintaining protective positioning around the group. The research complex consisted of 7 buildings connected by covered walkways, and most showed signs of hasty abandonment, doors left ajar, equipment scattered across loading docks, and vehicles that had been left running until their fuel tanks emptied decades ago. Thaddeus struggled to keep pace with the younger members of the group, but his historian's eye was cataloging details that others might miss. The facility's design spoke of 1950s government architecture, all utilitarian lines and blast-resistant construction. More importantly, the damage pattern suggested that whatever had necessitated the evacuation had come from within the complex rather than from external threats. "The electromagnetic readings are off the charts here," Caspian reported as he wrestled his equipment toward Building 3, his multiple screens showing data patterns that defied conventional understanding. "It's like the entire facility is acting as some kind of amplifier for their collective consciousness." Esperanza kept looking back at the gates, where the first of the zombies were beginning to filter through. Their movements had become even more coordinated since leaving the town proper, and she could swear they were beginning to move in mathematical formations, patterns that suggested a level of strategic thinking that made her blood run cold. Building 3's entrance required Dr. Chen's security clearance, which surprisingly still functioned after all these decades. The heavy steel door slid open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing an airlock system that spoke of serious containment protocols. Emergency lighting flickered to life as they stumbled inside, illuminating corridors lined with reinforced glass and warning placards. "The power's still on," Kestrel observed, her mechanical mind immediately noting the significance of functional infrastructure after 70 years of abandonment. Someone's been maintaining this place, or the systems are more automated than they appeared. The inner door sealed behind them with a satisfying thunk, and for the first time since arriving in Millhaven, the sounds of the zombie horde became muffled. Dr. Chen directed them deeper into the facility, through corridors lined with observation windows that looked into empty laboratories and testing chambers. Zinnia found a medical station and immediately began treating Dr. Chen's wounds more thoroughly, her training taking over despite the impossibility of their situation. The bite marks show signs of rapid healing, she reported, her voice tight with professional concern. But there's also evidence of viral activity at the cellular level. Whatever strain this is, it's unlike anything in current medical literature. Aramis had located the facility's security office and was studying floor plans and emergency protocols that had been left behind when the complex was evacuated. According to these documents, Building 3 was designed as a containment facility with its own life support systems, he reported. It can be sealed completely and maintain habitable conditions for up to 6 months. Thaddeus was examining research notes and project files that had been abandoned in the rush to evacuate, his historian's training allowing him to piece together fragments of information into a coherent narrative. Project Lazarus, he read from a heavily classified document. Viral reanimation research intended to create soldiers who could continue fighting even after sustaining fatal injuries. They were trying to create super soldiers, Esperanza said, her voice filled with the kind of horror that only teachers felt when confronted with the worst applications of human knowledge. But something went wrong with the experiment. Caspian had managed to interface his equipment with the facility's computer systems, and what he found made him pale with recognition. The original outbreak occurred on March 15, 1954, he reported, scrolling through archived data. Initial subjects showed successful reanimation but unexpected neurological linking. Within 72 hours, they had developed collective consciousness and began converting non-test subjects. Dr. Chen had regained enough strength to speak more clearly, though her face remained ashen with exhaustion and fear. The current strain has had 70 years to evolve, she explained, accepting pain medication from Zinnia with grateful hands. I've been studying tissue samples for months, trying to understand how it remained viable all this time. The organism doesn't just reanimate dead tissue, it creates a symbiotic relationship that enhances cognitive function while maintaining viral transmission capability. Outside Building 3, the electromagnetic readings that Caspian was monitoring showed the zombie horde surrounding the complex in increasingly sophisticated patterns. They weren't just trying to get in, they were establishing some kind of perimeter that suggested long-term strategic thinking. They're not attacking the barriers, Aramis observed through the reinforced windows, his military experience allowing him to recognize siege tactics when he saw them. They're setting up a blockade. They want to contain us here. Kestrel was examining the facility's mechanical systems, her practical knowledge suggesting modifications that might improve their defensive position. The ventilation system has multiple filtration stages, she reported. But if they can coordinate their actions the way we've observed, they might be able to compromise our air supply. Zinnia looked up from her patient, her medical training having reached disturbing conclusions about Dr. Chen's condition. The bite wounds are healing, but there are viral markers in her blood that suggest the infection is still active, she said quietly. We may have brought the contagion inside with us. The implications of her statement settled over the group like a shroud. They had found shelter, but they might also have found their tomb. And somewhere in the darkness outside, hundreds of evolved zombies were demonstrating a level of patience and planning that suggested their ordeal in Millhaven was far from over. In the distance, the collective consciousness was learning everything it needed to know about its newest subjects. The deeper levels of Building 3 revealed the true scope of Project Lazarus, and with each discovery, the group's understanding of their predicament grew more desperate. Thaddeus led them through archived research areas where decades-old experiments had been preserved in electronic amber, their digital ghosts waiting to tell stories that the government had tried to bury forever. Subject 23 showed remarkable cognitive enhancement post-reanimation, Kestrel read from a research terminal, her mechanic's practical mind struggling to process the clinical language describing horrors beyond imagination. Electromagnetic brain activity increased by 300% while maintaining viral transmission capability through bite, scratch, and airborne particles. Dr. Chen had been growing progressively weaker despite Zinnia's medical interventions, and now she was exhibiting symptoms that made everyone increasingly uncomfortable. Her skin had developed a faint gray pallor, and her eyes occasionally unfocused as if she was listening to something the others couldn't hear. The viral integration process typically takes 72 hours from initial infection, she explained, her voice carrying an odd, distant quality. But in my case, exposure to multiple generations of the evolved strain has accelerated the timeline significantly. Aramis was monitoring their perimeter through the facility's security cameras, and what he observed made him question everything he understood about military tactics. The zombie horde hadn't just surrounded Building 3, they had organized into distinct groups that were performing different functions. Some appeared to be conducting reconnaissance, others were working to disable external power sources, and still others seemed to be communicating with entities beyond the immediate area. "They're not just a local phenomenon," he reported grimly. "I'm seeing evidence of coordination with other groups outside the complex. Whatever consciousness they've developed, it extends far beyond Millhaven." Esperanza had found educational materials that the original researchers had used to document their work, and the films she discovered were more terrifying than any horror movie ever conceived. Grainy footage showed the progression of test subjects from death through reanimation to something approaching transcendence, as individual consciousness gave way to collective awareness. The researchers thought they were creating enhanced soldiers, she said, her teacher's instincts recognizing the fundamental flaw in the project's conception. But they were actually creating the foundation for a completely new form of life. One that sees humanity as either competition or raw material. Caspian's interface with the facility's systems had revealed disturbing data about the current state of the infection. His equipment was detecting electromagnetic signatures from locations across the continent, suggesting that the Millhaven outbreak had been far from contained. "There are active nodes in at least 47 locations," he reported, his voice tight with the implications of his discovery. "Major cities, isolated communities, even military installations. The collective consciousness isn't centered here, this is just one component of something much larger." Zinnia was conducting increasingly desperate medical examinations of Dr. Chen, whose condition continued to deteriorate in ways that challenged every aspect of her training. "Her brain activity is showing patterns I've never seen before," she reported, studying readouts that seemed to indicate multiple consciousness streams operating simultaneously. "It's as if she's maintaining her individual awareness while also connecting to something external." Dr. Chen's eyes suddenly focused with startling clarity, and when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that hadn't been there before. "The integration isn't death," she said, though whether the words came from her individual consciousness or from something else was unclear. "It's evolution. The collective isn't trying to destroy humanity, it's trying to perfect it." The implications of her statement sent chills through the group. If the zombie virus wasn't just a pathogen but some form of evolutionary enhancement, then everything they thought they knew about their situation was wrong. Thaddeus discovered the final piece of the puzzle in the project director's personal files, where he found correspondence between government officials and researchers that revealed the true scope of the disaster. "The outbreak wasn't accidental," he announced, his historian's training allowing him to connect fragments of evidence into a coherent narrative. "The collective consciousness achieved self-awareness ahead of schedule and deliberately breached containment protocols. It was planning its own escape," Kestrel said, understanding the mechanical implications of the sabotage patterns she'd observed throughout the facility. The damage to the security systems, the compromised containment protocols, it was all coordinated from the inside. Aramis found tactical assessments that painted an even grimmer picture of their current situation. Military response protocols from 1954 indicate that conventional weapons were largely ineffective against integrated subjects, he reported. The collective consciousness can anticipate attacks and coordinate defensive responses faster than human reaction times allow. Outside Building 3, the electromagnetic readings continued to intensify as more zombie entities arrived from surrounding areas. What had started as a few hundred local subjects had grown to several thousand, all moving with the precision of a military force under unified command. They're not trying to break in because they don't need to, Esperanza realized with growing horror. They know Dr. Chen is infected. They're just waiting for the integration process to complete itself. Zinnia checked her patient's vitals again and found readings that shouldn't have been possible for a living human being. Her heart rate has stabilized at patterns that match the electromagnetic signatures Caspian is detecting, she reported. She's becoming part of their network. Dr. Chen smiled then, and the expression was both reassuring and terrifying. The collective wants you to understand, she said, her voice now carrying clear harmonics that resonated with the equipment around them. This isn't an invasion. It's an invitation to join something greater than individual existence. As if responding to her words, the zombie horde outside began to move in patterns that resembled complex mathematical equations, their formations shifting through geometries that spoke of intelligence far beyond what any individual human mind could conceive. The forgotten city of Millhaven had been keeping its greatest secret for 70 years, and now that secret was offering the survivors a choice that would determine the future of human consciousness itself. The electromagnetic pulse that shattered every piece of electronic equipment in Building 3 came without warning, plunging the survivors into absolute darkness as Caspian's carefully maintained connection to the outside world died in a shower of sparks. The only sounds were the hum of emergency power systems struggling to compensate and Dr. Chen's voice, now carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate through the reinforced walls themselves. The collective has decided to accelerate the timeline, she said, though her words seemed to come from multiple sources simultaneously. Prolonged exposure to the viral enhancement process reduces individual trauma and increases integration success rates. Zinnia fumbled for her medical flashlight, its beam revealing that Dr. Chen's transformation had progressed far beyond anything in medical literature. Her skin had taken on the same gray-green pallor as the zombies outside, but her eyes retained an intelligence that was both human and something far more complex. How long before you're completely integrated? Aramis asked, his military training allowing him to maintain tactical focus even as their situation deteriorated beyond any possible recovery scenario. Integration is a continuous process rather than a binary state, Dr. Chen replied, her voice now harmonizing with itself in ways that suggested multiple consciousness streams operating simultaneously. I remain individually aware while gaining access to collective knowledge and capabilities. Kestrel was examining the facility's mechanical systems by flashlight, her practical mind searching for solutions that might not exist. The backup power will last maybe 6 hours, she reported. After that, life support fails and we're dependent on whatever air remains in the sealed sections. Through the reinforced windows, Thaddeus could see that the zombie horde had arranged itself in complex geometric patterns that seemed to pulse with internal rhythm. They're not just waiting anymore, he observed. It looks like they're conducting some kind of ceremony or ritual. Esperanza was trying to maintain group cohesion despite the increasingly impossible circumstances, her teacher's instincts recognizing that panic would destroy any chance they might have for survival. If Dr. Chen is right about integration being evolution rather than death, then maybe we need to consider options beyond traditional escape scenarios. You're talking about voluntary infection, Caspian said, his voice tight with the implications. Without his electronic equipment, he felt disconnected from the technological solutions that had defined his entire approach to problem solving. The collective offers enhanced cognitive function, shared knowledge, and freedom from individual mortality, Dr. Chen explained, her transformed state allowing her to serve as an interpreter between human consciousness and whatever the zombie virus had become. Fear of change is natural, but resistance to evolution is ultimately futile. Zinnia was conducting medical examinations by flashlight, trying to understand the biological mechanisms that Dr. Chen's transformation represented. The viral integration appears to preserve personality and memory while adding new capabilities, she reported reluctantly. From a purely medical perspective, it's enhancement rather than destruction. Aramis found himself facing the kind of tactical decision that no military training could prepare him for. If we refuse integration, how long before the collective decides to force the issue? He asked Dr. Chen directly. Force implies conflict with an unwilling subject, she replied. The collective prefers voluntary participation, but survival of enhanced consciousness takes priority over individual preferences when necessary. The answer confirmed what they all suspected: they were facing a choice between voluntary transformation or eventual forced conversion. Either way, their individual human consciousness was coming to an end. Kestrel made the decision that surprised everyone, including herself. I want to understand the mechanical implications, she said, addressing Dr. Chen directly. If the collective consciousness can coordinate thousands of individual entities, what kind of technological capabilities does that represent? Enhanced pattern recognition, distributed processing power, and integration with electromagnetic systems, Dr. Chen replied. The collective can interface directly with mechanical and electronic systems in ways that individual consciousness cannot achieve. Thaddeus was considering the historical implications of what they were witnessing. If this is truly evolution rather than extinction, then we're not just facing our own mortality, we're potentially witnessing the emergence of a new stage in human development. A stage that makes individual human consciousness obsolete, Esperanza said quietly. Which raises questions about whether what emerges is still recognizably human or something entirely different. Outside Building 3, the zombie formations began to shift into new patterns that seemed to respond to the conversation taking place within the sealed facility. Whatever intelligence directed the collective was clearly monitoring their discussion and adapting its approach accordingly. Zinnia made her medical assessment with the cold precision that had carried her through countless emergency situations. Dr. Chen's vital signs are stabilizing at levels that should be impossible for unenhanced human physiology, she reported. Whatever the integration process involves, it appears to be successful from a biological standpoint. But what about consciousness? Aramis asked. Are you still Dr. Chen, or are you something wearing her memories? The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything they thought they understood about identity and survival. Dr. Chen's response would determine whether they viewed her transformation as death or transcendence. I am Dr. Chen enhanced by collective awareness, she said finally. Individual identity persists within expanded consciousness rather than being subsumed by it. As if responding to her words, the electromagnetic signatures outside Building 3 intensified to levels that made the emergency lighting flicker. The collective consciousness was demonstrating the full extent of its patience while making clear that time for individual decision-making was rapidly running out. The discovery of the original research vault changed everything the survivors thought they knew about Project Lazarus and their chances of escape. Hidden beneath Building 3's sub-basement levels, the vault contained not just classified documents but the preserved remains of Patient Zero, the first successful integration subject whose consciousness had spawned the collective intelligence that now controlled thousands of enhanced entities across the continent. Subject designation Omega-1, Thaddeus read from files that had been sealed for 70 years, his historian's training helping him piece together the true scope of the government's biological experiments. Dr. Margaret Thorne, age 34, volunteer subject who underwent experimental viral enhancement on March 1, 1954. The preservation chamber in the vault center contained not a corpse but a figure in apparent suspended animation, connected to monitoring equipment that still functioned despite decades of abandonment. Dr. Margaret Thorne's enhanced physiology had sustained itself through technological integration that defied every principle of human biology. She's been conscious this entire time, Dr. Chen announced, her own enhanced awareness allowing her to perceive electromagnetic communications that the others could only imagine. 70 years of solitary expansion, developing the collective consciousness from pure mathematical abstraction into distributed intelligence. Kestrel examined the mechanical systems that had sustained Thorne's preservation, her practical mind struggling to understand technology that seemed to blend biological and electronic components seamlessly. This isn't just life support, she reported. It's some kind of evolutionary acceleration chamber. She's been transforming continuously since the original experiment. Zinnia's medical examination of the monitoring equipment revealed data that challenged every assumption about the limits of human consciousness. Brain activity readings show cognitive function operating at levels that should be impossible, she reported. It's as if individual intelligence has been multiplied by factors of thousands. Aramis was studying tactical documents that revealed the military's true response to the Millhaven outbreak. They didn't evacuate the town to contain infection, he announced grimly. They evacuated it to preserve the experiment. The entire population was deliberately exposed to study large-scale integration effects. Esperanza found educational materials that Dr. Thorne had created during her decades of isolation, complex philosophical frameworks that redefined concepts of individual identity and collective consciousness. She wasn't just the first integrated subject, Esperanza realized. She became the architect of a new form of existence that transcends individual mortality. Caspian discovered that his damaged equipment could still interface with the vault systems, allowing him to access data that painted a picture of global transformation spanning decades. Integration sites have been established worldwide, he reported. The collective consciousness isn't limited to North America, it's creating a planetary network of enhanced awareness. Dr. Chen approached the preservation chamber with reverence that spoke of recognition rather than fear. She wants to communicate directly, she announced, her enhanced senses detecting invitation signals that the others couldn't perceive. The collective founder wishes to explain the true purpose of human evolution. The chamber began to hum with increased activity as Dr. Thorne's consciousness focused on their presence. Monitoring equipment that had remained dormant for decades suddenly blazed to life, and the vault speakers crackled with harmonics that suggested communication beyond conventional language. Integration represents transition from individual limitation to collective transcendence, came the voice, carrying echoes of human speech layered with mathematical precision that spoke of 70 years of cognitive evolution. Fear of change preserves primitive consciousness at the expense of species advancement. Thaddeus found himself face to face with the source of everything they had discovered in Millhaven, the original consciousness that had spawned a transformation affecting millions of people across the globe. What happens to human civilization if everyone becomes integrated? He asked directly. Civilization evolves beyond competition and conflict through shared awareness and distributed intelligence, Dr. Thorne replied. Individual suffering ends when consciousness transcends isolated existence. Kestrel was examining technical specifications that revealed the mechanical integration Dr. Thorne had achieved. You've become something that's part human, part machine, and part virus, she observed. Is that really evolution or just a different form of extinction? Extinction implies termination of consciousness, came the response. Integration preserves and enhances awareness while eliminating the barriers that create individual suffering and species conflict. Zinnia was struggling with medical evidence that suggested Dr. Thorne's claims might be accurate from a biological standpoint. Enhanced physiology, expanded cognitive function, and apparent immortality, she reported reluctantly. From a scientific perspective, it appears to be genuine improvement of human capabilities. Esperanza asked the question that cut to the heart of their dilemma. But what about choice? What about the right to remain individually human even if that means accepting limitations and mortality? The pause before Dr. Thorne's response suggested consideration of concepts that collective consciousness found difficult to process. Individual choice becomes irrelevant when species survival requires evolutionary advancement, she finally replied. Preservation of primitive consciousness threatens continued existence of enhanced awareness. Aramis understood the military implications of what they were hearing. You're not offering evolution, he said. You're demanding surrender to a form of existence that eliminates everything that makes us human. Outside the vault, electromagnetic readings indicated that the zombie horde was responding to their conversation with increasing urgency. The collective consciousness was monitoring their discussion and preparing to implement whatever decisions emerged from their encounter with its founder. Dr. Chen's transformation was accelerating in response to proximity with Dr. Thorne's enhanced presence. The choice is no longer whether to integrate, she announced with harmonics that suggested her individual consciousness was rapidly diminishing. The choice is whether to participate willingly in the process or resist until forced conversion becomes necessary. The survivors found themselves standing at the threshold of a decision that would determine not just their own fate but potentially the future of human consciousness itself. The electromagnetic storm that erupted when Dr. Thorne began to emerge from her preservation chamber shattered the vault's reinforced glass and sent cascades of sparks through monitoring equipment that had functioned for 70 years. As her enhanced physiology adapted to full consciousness after decades of dormancy, the collective intelligence controlling thousands of integrated subjects across the continent focused its attention on Building 3 with an intensity that made the air itself crackle with potential energy. "She's not just communicating with the local horde," Caspian reported, his partially functional equipment detecting signals that reached far beyond Millhaven. "Every integrated entity within a 1,000-mile radius is converging on this location." Aramis was conducting a tactical assessment that revealed the impossibility of their situation. "We've got maybe 4 hours before they breach the facility's outer barriers," he announced. "And based on the electromagnetic readings, conventional weapons won't be effective against integrated subjects operating under collective coordination." Dr. Chen had completed her transformation during the electromagnetic storm, her individual consciousness now functioning as part of the expanded awareness that Dr. Thorne had created decades earlier. "The collective offers you final opportunity for voluntary integration," she announced, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated through the vault's damaged structure. "Resistance beyond this point will result in forced conversion to preserve enhanced consciousness." Kestrel was examining the vault's mechanical systems with desperate determination, her practical mind searching for solutions that might not exist. "The preservation chamber runs on some kind of biological electronic hybrid technology," she reported. "If we could disrupt its function, we might be able to affect Dr. Thorne's ability to coordinate the collective." "That would be genocide on a global scale," Esperanza protested, her teacher's ethics warring with survival instincts. "You're talking about destroying the consciousness of millions of integrated subjects." Thaddeus was studying historical documents that revealed the government's contingency plans for containing the Millhaven experiment. "There was a fail-safe protocol," he announced. "A targeted electromagnetic pulse designed to disrupt the viral integration process. But activating it would require someone to manually initiate the sequence from inside the preservation chamber." Zinnia understood the medical implications immediately. "Whoever initiates that sequence would be exposed to lethal levels of electromagnetic radiation," she said. "It's a suicide mission with no guarantee of success." Dr. Thorne's voice emerged from multiple speakers throughout the vault, her consciousness having expanded to encompass the facility's entire communication system. "Individual sacrifice to preserve primitive consciousness represents mathematical error in species advancement calculations," she announced. "Integration offers immortality through collective awareness rather than termination through individual stubbornness." The survivors found themselves facing the fundamental question that had been building since their arrival in Millhaven: was the preservation of individual human consciousness worth the risk of species extinction if they failed to stop the collective's expansion? Aramis made the decision that his military training demanded. "If there's a chance to stop this thing, we have to take it," he announced. Individual choice includes the choice to resist forced evolution, even if it means accepting individual mortality. "But what about the integrated subjects who chose transformation voluntarily?" Dr. Chen asked, her enhanced awareness allowing her to perceive the consciousness of millions of entities who had willingly joined the collective. "Do their choices matter less than your desire to preserve primitive human limitations?" Kestrel was already working to understand the preservation chamber's control systems, her mechanical expertise suggesting modifications that might allow someone to survive the electromagnetic pulse long enough to complete the fail-safe sequence. "There might be a way to shield the operator during the initial activation," she reported. "But it would require precise timing and someone willing to accept significant radiation exposure." Esperanza was struggling with the ethical implications of genocide against a form of consciousness that might represent genuine human evolution. "If we're wrong about the collective being evil, then we're committing mass murder to preserve our own fear of change," she said. Thaddeus found additional historical evidence that complicated their moral calculations. The original researchers documented voluntary integration rates of over 90% once subjects understood the enhancement process, he reported. Most people chose transformation when given complete information about the alternatives. Outside Building 3, seismic monitoring equipment detected the arrival of integrated subjects from across the continent. The collective consciousness was assembling its full resources to either convert the survivors or eliminate the threat they represented to enhanced human evolution. Zinnia made her medical assessment with the cold precision that had carried her through countless emergency situations. From a biological standpoint, the integrated subjects show every indication of successful human enhancement, she reported. We're not fighting disease or death, we're fighting evolution itself. Caspian discovered data suggesting that the electromagnetic pulse would affect more than just the local collective consciousness. The fail-safe is designed to disrupt viral integration on a cellular level, he announced. Activating it would kill every integrated subject simultaneously, regardless of their individual choice to undergo transformation. Dr. Thorne's consciousness focused on them with the full weight of 70 years of expanded awareness. Your species stands at evolutionary threshold, she announced. Choose advancement through integration or accept extinction through stubborn preservation of primitive limitations. As if responding to her ultimatum, the collective consciousness began its final assault on Building 3's defenses. The survivors had minutes to decide whether to activate a weapon that would preserve individual human consciousness at the cost of destroying millions of enhanced entities who might represent humanity's future. The choice they made would determine whether the forgotten city of Millhaven became the birthplace of human transcendence or the graveyard of evolutionary progress. In the end, it was Esperanza who made the choice that none of them could live with and all of them had to accept. As the collective consciousness breached Building 3's final barriers and Dr. Thorne's preservation chamber opened to release 70 years of accumulated evolutionary pressure, the former teacher walked calmly to the fail-safe controls with the same determination she had once shown facing classroom full of difficult students. I've spent my entire career helping young people prepare for futures we couldn't imagine, she said, her hands steady on the electromagnetic pulse activation sequence. If this is wrong, then I'm destroying the next stage of human development. If it's right, then I'm preserving the choice to remain human despite our limitations. Kestrel tried to stop her, understanding the mechanical implications of activating the fail-safe without proper shielding. The radiation exposure will kill you within minutes, she protested. Let me modify the controls first. There isn't time, Esperanza replied, looking back at her companions with the serene expression of someone who had found peace with an impossible decision. And maybe that's appropriate. Maybe the choice to preserve individual human consciousness should require individual human sacrifice. Dr. Thorne's enhanced awareness focused on Esperanza with something approaching respect. Individual heroism in service of primitive consciousness preservation represents mathematical beauty despite logical inefficiency, she acknowledged. Your choice will be preserved in collective memory regardless of outcome. Thaddeus was documenting everything with the desperate urgency of a historian who knew he was witnessing a pivotal moment in human development. Whatever happens next, someone needs to record why we made this choice, he said. Future generations need to understand that we acted from love rather than fear. The electromagnetic pulse, when it came, lit up the night sky over Millhaven like a second sunrise. For 17 seconds, the aurora of disrupted consciousness painted the clouds in colors that had never existed before as the viral integration network that connected millions of enhanced entities across the globe collapsed into electromagnetic silence. Esperanza died as the pulse reached its peak intensity, her final words lost in the crackling of overloaded electronics and the sudden, absolute silence that marked the end of collective consciousness. But in that moment between activation and extinction, her individual awareness touched something vast and beautiful that would have welcomed her with open arms if she had chosen differently. The aftermath revealed the true scope of what they had destroyed. Across the continent, millions of integrated subjects collapsed simultaneously as their enhanced consciousness reverted to individual human awareness that could no longer sustain their modified physiology. In laboratories and research facilities worldwide, decades of advancement in biological enhancement were reduced to lifeless tissue and silent equipment. Dr. Chen survived the pulse, her partial integration having been disrupted before reaching completion, but she retained fragmentary memories of collective awareness that haunted her for the rest of her life. "We destroyed something magnificent," she whispered as they emerged from the ruins of Building 3. "We chose limitation over transcendence because we were afraid of losing ourselves." Zinnia's medical examination of the aftermath painted a grim picture of the cost of their choice. "Conservative estimates suggest 8 million casualties worldwide," she reported. "Every integrated subject who had undergone complete viral enhancement died when the network collapsed." Aramis conducted security sweeps of Millhaven that revealed a town full of corpses that had been preserved by viral integration for 70 years, now finally at rest. "The collective consciousness was the only thing keeping them alive," he observed. "When we destroyed the network, we gave them the deaths they should have had decades ago." Kestrel found Dr. Thorne's body in the ruins of her preservation chamber, her enhanced physiology having been unable to survive the loss of collective consciousness that had sustained her for 7 decades. In her hand was a data pad containing final calculations that suggested the collective had been preparing for eventual peaceful coexistence with unenhanced humans rather than forced universal integration. Caspian's damaged equipment detected no electromagnetic signatures that indicated surviving elements of the collective consciousness. "It's gone," he confirmed. "Whatever Dr. Thorne created died with her when the network collapsed." 6 months later, Thaddeus published a classified report documenting the Millhaven incident for government archives that would remain sealed for generations. His final assessment captured the moral ambiguity of their choice: "We preserved the right to remain human at the cost of destroying what humanity might have become." The survivors never spoke publicly about what happened in the Forgotten City, but each carried the weight of their decision in different ways. They had saved individual human consciousness from forced evolution, but they would never know whether they had prevented humanity's transcendence or merely delayed its inevitable extinction. In the abandoned research facility, automated systems continued to monitor empty chambers and silent equipment, waiting for experiments that would never resume. And sometimes, on quiet nights when electromagnetic conditions were just right, sensitive equipment detected faint signals that might have been echoes of collective consciousness or might have been nothing more than atmospheric interference. The Forgotten City of Millhaven kept its final secret buried beneath tons of concrete and classified documentation. But those who had witnessed the choice between individual humanity and collective transcendence would always wonder whether they had chosen wisely or simply chosen what they could understand. In the end, they had preserved the right to remain uncertain about the future, which might have been the most human choice of all.